Hi, folks, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the changing demographics of Australia, or in this case, downtown Sydney. I've had to go into downtown for a few days in a row recently, and so I'm in one of the busiest, probably the busiest train station in Australia, and I'm standing there waiting for a train. It's a few minutes till the train arrives, so I'm sort of aimlessly looking around and off in a dream world. Then turning around, I notice there's not a single white person anywhere around me. This is standing on the train platform, and that so I'm not really surprised by that anymore, given the amount of times that I've seen it, the amount of times I'm the only white person on the train or the bus, or the only white person on the train platform. It's kind of something that I'm just sort of that's just the reality of today. And now, if we were looking at, say, from 25, 30 years ago, it was such a novelty to see a non-white person on a train platform or in a bus or on a train. It was such a novelty that you would turn and sort of stare, because there's just so few of them. So that's changed. If you got into a time machine in, say, the late 1990s, somewhere around there in Sydney, and then it transported you to exactly the same spot at the train platform today, you would swear you'd gone into another country. The time machine sent me to the wrong place. This isn't Sydney or Australia. So you would go from 99% white people to 5%, less than 5% white people, and that's happened in 25 to 30 years, and that's the extent of it. That's the level of demographic change that's occurred in that time. Do I particularly care? Does it me sort of do I particularly care? Being a very well-traveled guy, and again being used to being the only white person in the hotel or the restaurant or the whatever, that sort of thing, then me personally, I'm sort of don't really care. What I do care about, though, is that I was never asked. The Australian people were never asked. There was no referendum. There's no government coming out saying, "Hey, guess what? We're gonna completely change the demographics of Australia. We're going to bring in 6, 7, 8, 9 million people into Australia, none of whom are white, none of whom speak English, none of whom are Christian, none of whom have any job skills, or we're going to bring that number in from the third world, and peasants that eat dogs, and goodness knows, why weren't we asked? And that's my issue here. If you wanted, clearly that was their intention from the outset to do it. Those were the writing instructions they got from the globalist cabal. And so they tried to do it through trickery and treachery and stealth, and through all manner of deception and treacheries, and which is what they've done. So that's my issue with this. Do I particularly care? Well, no. From an economic viewpoint, why bringing in 4 foot 10 inch tall, 145 centimeter illiterate peasants that have serious health problems, bringing them in en masse? How is that a good thing economically? If you go to any hospital waiting room or into any hospital, you'll see that their demands and the strain of stress they put on the health system, which is ostensibly free in Australia, the taxpayers pay for it. So the idea is everyone's paying tax and contributing, and therefore they get out. But that's not how it's working. These people arrive from third world countries, they're let in, and they have serious health problems, and they're able to access free health care. But they're very childlike. They just think money is a magical thing that appears out of the sky, and that they're as much entitled to as anyone else. So my issue is that the public, the taxpayer, the voters never agreed to it. They were never asked. They never agreed. That is my issue with this. So anyway, so I'm standing there, and I notice I'm looking around on the train platform. Certainly the people who are anywhere near me, there was no white people. I mean, as in zero, zip, nada, zilch. Then I looked across to a platform train platform. There's like 12 platforms or something in this train station, and I looked across to the platform on the other side, and I noticed that it was how many women were there wearing burkas and the head covering, the Islamic head covering, and so I looked and thought, gee whiz, there's a lot of them over there. Why is that? And I didn't see any. They didn't appear to be together or in one group, or not from what I could see, at least. So, given I had some time to kill, I sort of started counting them, and so I got to like 50, and I stopped. Think, wow, there's a lot of them there. I mean, how do you get that many women wearing burqas on just one train platform in downtown Sydney? I mean, is that even possible? Are they paid by the government to do this or something? I mean, is this natural or organic? I don't know. But then sort of, again, with some time, I counted the amount of white people on that platform. Now, remember, this is just women in burqas. So I counted the number of white people, men, women, children, the number that I could see from my vantage point. And there was, I got to 10 and I couldn't see any more. So the Islamic women in burqas outnumbered the total number of white people, all ages, all genders, by 5 to 1. And you've got to be kidding, in downtown Sydney. I mean, that's bullshit, isn't it? Again, this isn't something that the Australian public ever agreed to. Now, if the government had been upfront about it, which is why they weren't, we're going to bring in fuckloads of peasants and illiterate peasants and this and that. We're going to completely change the demographic of Australia in a few years' time. You won't see another white person in downtown Sydney. It would be absolutely crushed at the referendum, and they wouldn't even have a snowball's chance of getting the public to agree to that. So, we just won't ask them. We'll just do it. Now, they used various tricks and tactics, and again, treacheries, I would argue, back in the day, saying, look, Australia's got this, we can't grow the economy. The Australian economy can't grow. We've just got this incredible skill shortage. It's a shortage of skills. There's just nobody here who's skilled, which is a similar argument to the one that the globalists put about around the world today. There's just no one to do the work. There's just nobody here. There's no workers in the West. We just have to bring in. So it's the same. So it's just just extending or modifying that same bullshit, which is grotesque untruth, by the way. It was an untruth back then, and it still is today. There was no shortage of skills ever. Now, the mining boom at the time was used as a pretext, but that's an over. And I think suddenly there are numerous mines being built, and there's a shortage of, say, mine engineers, for example. Now I accept that they, given how quickly the whole mining thing just burst onto the scene, new mines being built, then I do get that there would be a sudden demand for example, mine engineers. But there's not a lot in the whole world anyway. So, you're going to have to train your own people. Sure, you can bring in some others from other places, but the big companies that are putting the mines together are already the ones that have multiple mines in multiple locations all across the world, and then they can move their engineers in and out and around. But instead, they used the mine building to bring in, again, shitloads of illiterate peasants who had no skills at all. So the immigration wasn't skilled. There was no skilled people coming in. Instead, it was a whole bunch of illiterate third world peasants. The government assured us, no, very high standards here. These people have to have serious qualifications. They have to speak college level English. They need this, they need that, there's the next thing. And that was a total lie. Had they actually delivered on that, then nobody would have had a problem. But they did the opposite. The amount of Chinese people who came in who couldn't speak a lick of English, that sort of thing. There was just hundreds of thousands of them being brought in. They're all fucking peasants and so on. So, and also the mass buying of residential real estate began at around that time as well. So these are sort of things. So I mean, do I particularly care how many burqas there may or may not be? Well, not exactly, no. And it doesn't really impact me personally. But the issue I have is we were never asked. There was never a referendum. There was never a clear government policy announcing it. The whole thing was done through trickery, treachery, sly, underhanded methods, and that I do have a problem with. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.